There's a story making the rounds online, a viral claim about a secret master plan from Ottawa. It details a supposed $733 billion weapon aimed right at the heart of the American economy, a counterpunch designed to bring a protectionist White House to its knees. You might have seen the headlines talking about a leverage architecture document. It sounds like something straight out of a political thriller, a high-stakes game of economic chicken. But in the rush for a clickable headline, the real story is getting lost. The truth behind that number and the power dynamic it represents is far more complex and, frankly, way more powerful than any single secret plan. This isn't about one weapon. It's about a quiet trillion-dollar entanglement that's been building for decades. It's a web of finance so vast and so intricate that it gives Canada a shocking silent advantage that almost nobody is talking about. Today, we're going to expose how it works, why it matters, and how it completely changes the game ahead of the most high-stakes trade negotiation in a generation. So, let's talk about that explosive idea. A multi-hundred-billion-dollar Canadian war chest ready to punish the United States for imposing tariffs. It's a compelling narrative, right? It's also a complete misinterpretation of what's actually going on. There is no secret government fund. The fact check is simple. It doesn't exist. The rumors seem to stem from a misunderstanding of a very real number: the total amount of money that Canadian firms and pension funds have invested in United States industries. This isn't a government weapon. It's private and pension-related capital that has been flowing south of the border for years, just looking for the best possible returns. The narrative of a secret plan is a classic example of how complex economic truths get twisted online. It takes a real phenomenon, Canada's massive financial footprint in the US, and recasts it as some kind of aggressive government plot. The reality is, the Canadian government doesn't directly control this mountain of cash. To find the real leverage, you don't look for a secret policy paper. You have to look at the portfolio managers and the investment committees that actually control the money. And that's where the story gets really interesting. Because while this isn't a government-controlled weapon, the sheer scale of this capital has inadvertently created one of the most powerful and misunderstood leverage points in modern geopolitics. The viral stories are looking for a dagger in a briefcase. The real weapon is the bank vault itself, a vault that holds the retirement savings of nearly every working Canadian. The headlines sensed the story, but they missed the source of the power. The leverage isn't a state secret, it's hiding in plain sight, listed on the public balance sheets of Canada's most powerful financial institutions. And the total sum isn't just a few $100 billion, it's much, much larger. Forget the myth of a secret government fund. The real story is about a group of financial titans known as the Maple 8. These are Canada's 8 largest public pension funds, and together they are a global investment force with well over $2 trillion in assets under management. These aren't government departments. They're independent, sophisticated, and globally respected investment managers. Their only job is to secure the retirement of millions of Canadians, teachers, municipal workers, civil servants, you name it. To do that, they hunt for stable, long-term returns all over the world. And their number one hunting ground, by a long shot, is the United States. Let's be clear about the numbers, because this is where the scale of this thing becomes undeniable. Recent analyses show that the Maple 8 collectively hold approximately $1 trillion in U.S. assets. This isn't an abstract number. This is direct ownership of American infrastructure, real estate, companies, and debt. Let's just look at the biggest player, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, or CPPIB. This fund manages the pensions for over 20 million Canadians. At the end of its 2025 fiscal year, CPPIB's net assets hit $699.6 billion. Now here's the kicker. Where is that money invested? According to their own disclosures, about 42 to 45% of that entire fund is invested in the United States. That's around $300 billion US dollars parked in the American economy from just one fund. For perspective, only about 12 to 13% of the CPPIB's assets are invested in Canada. This pattern repeats across the Maple 8. The Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System, OMERS, around 55% of its portfolio is American. The Public Sector Pension Investment Board, or PSP, its U.S. holdings hover near 40%. And these are not small passive stock holdings. We're talking about massive, often controlling, stakes in the bedrock of the U.S. economy. What are they buying? Everything. They own huge shares in major American tech companies. They own office towers in Manhattan and Chicago. They own vital infrastructure like ports, toll roads, and power grids across the country. They are the silent partners behind some of America's biggest private equity deals. This flood of capital really took off after 2005, when the Canadian government removed a cap on foreign holdings in pension funds. This wasn't a secret plot. It was just smart diversification. The Canadian market is simply too small to absorb all the money these funds need to invest, so they went to the biggest and most stable market in the world, the United States. For 2 decades, this has been a quiet, win-win relationship. The U.S. gets a reliable fire hose of long-term investment capital to fund its economy and create jobs. Canadian pensioners get the steady returns they need, but what was once a simple investment strategy has now, in an era of trade wars, morphed into something else entirely. It has become a hidden architecture of economic interdependence so profound that it acts as a powerful, unspoken deterrent. It's Canada's trillion-dollar insurance policy. So, Canada's pension funds have $1 trillion in the United States. Why is that leverage? It's a fair question. After all, if Canada were to suddenly pull that money out, wouldn't it hurt Canadian pensioners just as much as the U.S. economy? Yes, it would. But that's precisely why the leverage is so powerful. It's not about the threat of selling everything off. It's about the reality of being co-invested. It has created a dynamic of shared risk, but with a critical asymmetric advantage for Canada. Here's the part that almost always gets missed. Canadian pension funds don't just invest in America, they invest alongside America's own most powerful financial institutions. When a Canadian fund buys a piece of U.S. infrastructure, it's often in a partnership with American pension funds like CalPERS in California or the New York State Common Retirement Fund. They're partners in the same deals. Think about what that means. If a hostile U.S. administration implements policies that deliberately damage the Canadian economy, the pain doesn't stop at the border. A major tariff that crushes a Canadian industry hurts the balance sheets of the Maple 8. But because their American holdings are so huge, any significant pain would force them to reevaluate their risk everywhere. More importantly, any American policy that attacks Canada and provokes a response, or even just creates massive economic uncertainty, directly threatens the value of the American assets these Canadian funds own. If you're a U.S. politician from, say, Texas, and you're cheering for tariffs against Canada, you are also cheering for policies that could devalue a major data center in your own state that's funded by Canadian pensioners. This creates an incredible dilemma for any U.S. administration. On one hand, the political rhetoric might be America first. On the other, the administration is desperate to attract foreign investment. You can't simultaneously court foreign capital and attack it. Imagine the scenario. The U.S. imposes a crippling tariff on Canada. The Canadian economy slows, global markets get nervous, the CEOs of the Maple 8 don't have to make a political statement. They just have to do their jobs. Their duty is to their pensioners. They'd be forced to act as any prudent investor would, by reducing exposure to markets that have become unpredictable. They wouldn't issue a press release saying, "We're divesting from the U.S. to punish the president." They would just quietly start shifting their future capital allocations. Maybe that next $10 billion infrastructure project they were planning for the U.S. now looks more attractive in Europe or Asia. This isn't a dramatic overnight pullout. It would be a slow, quiet turning of the tap, from a fire hose to a garden hose. But for an American economy that relies on this massive inflow of Canadian capital, even a small change would have huge consequences. It's a paradox. To attack Canada economically is to attack one of your largest and most reliable foreign investors. The leverage isn't a threat to sell, it's the implicit threat to stop buying. And in a world hungry for capital, the people with $1 trillion to spend hold the ultimate power. This brings us to the summer of 2026 and the mandatory joint review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. This isn't just a routine check-in. The deal has a sunset clause that could eventually kill it if all 3 countries don't agree to keep it going. For a second Trump administration, this review is seen as a golden opportunity to push for more concessions on everything from dairy to manufacturing. We've already seen tariffs become a key feature of the relationship, with the U.S. imposing them and the Carney government in Canada retaliating while also making strategic concessions, like axing a proposed digital tax and pledging more on defense. This is where the standard narrative about the U.S.-Canada relationship gets turned on its head. The traditional view is based on the idea that Canada, with its heavy reliance on U.S. trade, has no choice but to fold. In 2025, around 72% of all Canadian goods exports still went to the United States. That dependence has always been seen as Canada's critical weakness. But the trillion-dollar pension web flips that script. The USMCA review is no longer just a negotiation between a customer and a supplier. It's a negotiation between two parties who are, in a very real sense, co-owners of the same house. What does winning the negotiation look like for the U.S. if it destabilizes the entire North American market? What good is a win on dairy if it triggers capital unease that makes it more expensive for every American company to borrow money? The U.S. Trade Representative's office is focused on trade deficits, but the CEOs of the Maple 8 are looking at their global portfolios. They see the USMCA as the legal framework that guarantees the stability of the market where they have $1 trillion invested. Any move by the U.S. to seriously threaten that deal is a direct threat to the retirement savings of millions of Canadians. This gives Canadian negotiators a powerful, silent card to play. They don't need to shout or make public threats. They just need to make sure their American counterparts understand the interconnected reality. The conversation can shift from the tactical to the strategic. You want to tear up the rules on auto parts? Let's talk about what that uncertainty does to the value of the supply chain companies our funds and your funds are invested in. It fundamentally changes the power dynamic. Canada's position isn't just about defending its own market, it's about defending the stability of the integrated North American economy. The irony is that America First policies have created a situation where its biggest trading partner also acts as one of its most important bankers. Donald Trump wants to be the ultimate dealmaker, but he's negotiating with a country that not only sells him goods, but also holds the mortgage on a big chunk of his country's assets. And that is a blind spot big enough to drive a transport truck through. While the trillion-dollar pension web is the hidden superweapon, it's not the only tool in Canada's kit. The deep economic entanglement shows up in several other critical areas. First, direct trade. Yes, Canada exports a lot to the U.S., but the reverse is also profoundly true. Canada is typically the largest single export market for the United States, with American businesses selling hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods and services north of the border each year. In 2024, that figure for goods alone was over $350 billion. For dozens of U.S. states, Canada is their #1 customer. This creates a powerful internal lobby in the U.S. Governors, factory owners, and farmers, who push back against a trade war with their own best client. Second, there's energy. In 2025, the U.S. imported roughly 4 million barrels of crude oil from Canada every single day, more than from all other countries combined. This isn't just a preference, it's infrastructure. Billions have been spent on pipelines connecting Canadian oil fields to specialized U.S. refineries that are physically built to process Canadian crude. They can't just switch to another type of oil overnight. The U.S. simply needs Canadian oil. Third is critical minerals. These are the inputs for everything from EVs to F-35 fighter jets. The U.S. has identified dozens of minerals it needs for national security. And for many of them, Canada is the primary, friendly, and secure source. As the U.S. tries to build secure supply chains to compete with China, it's finding it has to rely on and even invest in its northern neighbor. How do you wage a trade war against a country you're counting on for your own security? Finally, Canada isn't just standing still. Facing American protectionism, it has been actively diversifying. While exports to the U.S. have been volatile, recent years have seen exports to non-U.S. countries surge to all-time highs. It's a deliberate, long-term pivot. At the same time, the government is making its own strategic investments, like bolstering its presence in the Arctic, an area of growing importance to the U.S. When you put all these pieces together, The pensions, the export markets, the energy, the minerals, and Canada's own strategy, the narrative of a helpless junior partner just falls apart. The relationship isn't one of dependency, but of deep, complex, and binding interdependency. So, let's go back to that viral claim of a secret Canadian weapon. The sensational headline was a distortion. There is no secret government plot. But the reality it hinted at is far more significant. Canada's real leverage is the public, transparent, and colossal weight of $1 trillion in pension capital woven into the very fabric of the American economy. This isn't leverage you use with angry press conferences. It's a quiet, structural power that operates in boardrooms. It's the power of patient capital. It's the power that comes from being the reliable partner a volatile America needs, and the quiet threat of shifting that capital if the partnership becomes unstable. The advantage Canada holds is this. In an era of uncertainty, Canada has become one of the most important sources of long-term investment for the United States. Its power doesn't come from threatening to be a bad partner, but from the implicit understanding of just how valuable it is as a good one. While American politics focuses on the next election, Canadian pension funds are making decisions with a 50-year horizon, and that long-term view gives them an influence that cuts through the political noise. This is the true story behind the headlines. It's not about a single weapon, but a web of mutual interest so thick it has become its own deterrent. It's a financial reality that reshapes the balance of power, giving Canada a subtle but immense advantage that is only now being fully revealed. This deep economic entanglement is no longer a secret. The trillion-dollar web is out in the open. As Canada navigates the critical 2026 USMCA review, this reality will hang over every conversation. So the final question is for you. Now that this leverage is clear, how should Canada use it? Should its negotiators play hardball, using the subtle threat of capital unease to push back? Or is the power most effective when left unspoken, relying on quiet diplomacy to ensure reason prevails? What's the smartest way to play the strongest hand Canada has ever held? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.